Buen día. Empezamos. Bueno. Bueno, gracias a todos por estar acá, y a los que estén también de manera virtual. Tenemos el placer de tener al doctor Harrington acá en la Universidad Nacional de Río Negro, después de una larga gira que hemos hecho por la cuenca neuquina, dentro de lo que se llama el proyecto de cobre en cuencas sedimentarias. El doctor Harrington, voy a hacer una breve reseña, es el líder científico del proyecto que es los recursos hacia economía verde en el Museo de Ciencias, en el Museo de Historia Natural en Londres. Es también profesor visitante del Carbon School of Mine de la University of Exeter, United Kingdom. Es el Consul Research del Merit Promotion y es el líder fue el líder hasta el año pasado científico del Museo de Historia Natural. También, bueno, es director y, bueno, tiene una carrera científica en lo que tiene que ver con la economía y la mineralogía ambiental. Bueno, actuales roles es el líder científico del programa de economía de los recursos naturales hacia economía verde. Es también miembro del Comité de Expertos en Minerales Críticos del Gobierno del Reino Unido. Es profesor advisor en el Centro de Inteligencia de Minerales Críticos. Es el counselor de la Sociedad de Geólogos Economistas del año 2022. Y bueno, actuó en numerosos proyectos de investigación y ha publicado más de 100 papers científicos en diferentes temáticas enfocadas en proyectos de investigación de descubrimientos y recuperación del cobre y metales críticos y otras investigaciones de interés como el bioprocesamiento y bioremediación estratégica de metales críticos. Bueno, para mí es un lujo poder contar con él acá y haber compartido, bueno, el viaje del campo. Fue muy fructífero, hemos discutido mucho también. Y bueno, los dejo en manos del doctor Richard para que dé esta charla que me parece de alto interés actual, ¿no? Bueno, Richard, todo tuyo.
Muchas gracias, Josefina. I'm going to apologize that I will be speaking in English, so I hope that is okay for everybody. But please, if there is anything that you are unclear about, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Yeah, thank you for the chance to be doing some geology in your wonderful country, and I've had a wonderful field excursion with Josefina and Maisa as well, helped us to see some fantastic geology. I continue to see new things in my career. I've been working 40 years in geology, but I always like to look at the rocks, and I think everybody probably shares that pleasure. So thank you very much for the invite. So today I'm just going to introduce myself a little bit. I'm based at the Natural History Museum in London. For those of you who have visited London, I hope you did come to see us. We are actually the most visited museum in the United Kingdom. We get 5 million visitors every year. Sometimes it's too busy in the holidays, but we have a range of science there. In addition to our exhibitions, we have 300 research scientists working there. So, but our research is based around the 80 million specimens we have, everything from the natural world. So meteorites, minerals, fossils, all the way all the way through to animals and plants and so on. And we have over 185,000 mineral specimens. We have a beautiful mineral gallery, which is, as it was done in 1881 when the museum was built, a systematic mineral gallery was set out, and it's one of the gems of the museum. Anyway, that's where I'm based. I also teach at a couple of universities at Imperial College in London, and I'm also a visiting professor down at the Campbell School of Mines in Exeter, as you know. And so I have a strong link with university research as well. Right, well, the backdrop to my talk about mining a green future is the fact that minerals are essential for human life. If you don't grow it, you have to mine it, take it out of the ground. And throughout our history, we started in like 1700 using only a few of the minerals for our windmills and fairly low budget technology that we had then. But during the Industrial Revolution, and obviously now the technological revolution, we've increased to the fact that each of us uses more than 36 elements on a daily basis from the periodic table. And not only do we have a wide range of elements, we're using them in increasing volume. And that's due to industrial, societal, and digital revolution. But there's an extra layer coming onto that, and I will talk about that, and that's the energy transition that is ahead of us. This diagram, I don't expect you to take. By the way, I'll share these slides with everybody. So any of the numbers and things, please, you can have copies of this. It's just to show the amount of minerals we will all use in our lives. This is American, so it's in pounds, but nevertheless, huge amounts of things like aluminium, clay, coal, lead, a range of things, copper, in everybody's daily lives. And that's the average for someone in the USA, who are the largest consumers per capita on the planet. The minerals industry, as a result, and if we look at the value of mined metals, the big piece of this is a pie chart of the value of different metals. You can see nearly half of that is iron, because we use so much. So we've got iron is a big chunk, then we've got copper, and we've got gold, then nickel, zinc, and all the other industrial metals here. And so these are the things we are mining, and this is the billions of dollars in revenue from each of those. So the iron ore industry is worth $350 billion in 2018. So it's probably around $500 billion now. So that's the GDP of a really major company. And then we have really big companies involved in mining. The biggest world international company is a company called Glencore. Then names you might have heard of: Rio Tinto, BHP. Vale, the Brazilian group, is one of the largest. And you can see they're also in China. Some big companies in China are part of that. But quite a few of those are energy companies, and they're currently mining things like coal, but also potash, so fertilizers. We dig those out of the ground. So a huge business worldwide, very, very important for human development. Now, as geologists, we are the people that provide those deposits that companies can mine. And if we look at this is a graph for copper from 1900 to the present day. And this is the amount of copper we are mining on an annual basis. And you can see we've been growing this. And particularly around about 1950, after the Second World War, huge escalation in the amount of metal that we have been mining. And you can see in 2000, around about the 2000s, we took another great hike. This is the point when China was really developing. And so we've got, after the Second World War, we had a big increase. and then with the big development in China. And we're seeing some other ones here, like this is probably due to India developing, places like Latin America, Brazil, and particularly Argentina's, obviously like a European economy has been part of this growth curve as well. And we've been very good as geologists in finding those deposits, and you can see where they're coming from, and see how Chile has been a huge producer of copper. Currently it produces around 30% of the world's copper. And traditional countries like USA, Canada, which were really important, like USA was the biggest producer of copper in the 1930s. It's now dwarfed by places and growth of places like China. And this is the other countries, Latin America, which we would include Argentina in that. And probably Argentina and Peru are the big countries for copper in that. So you can see we have been finding enough for what we need, but can we keep going on like that? That's a big question. And the answer is we don't. There's a problem at the moment. This is a graph that shows that curve growing, and you can see this is the Chilean copper. But after about 2040, based on the current deposits we know have been discovered, we're going to have a shortfall, a decline in copper production. So we need to get more discovery moving forward. And so this is worrying, because I'm going to talk about some increasing challenges that we're going to face going forward. Now, there's a lot of people who've been saying recycling. We can recycle a lot of things. Well, this is I'm sorry it's very busy, but this is the periodic table, and it shows the each of the elements, and then the amount of the percentage of elements that are recycled when they come to the end of their life. So, for example, something like lead, we recycle much more than 50%. So anything in blue here, we recycle more than 50% in total. In green, it's up to 50%, and then the other, this is decreasing amounts of levels of recycling. Now, the red ones are where we recycle less than 1% of that metal. So things like barium, yttrium, osmium, arsenic, some of the rare earths. We don't, particularly the rare earths, we don't recycle those very much at all. So we can't ask for our supply to come from recycling if we're not recycling at all. So we really do need to improve recycling, but even so, it's not going to be enough. And there's been a particular challenge that's arisen in the last 20, 30 years that is driving things even further into the problem area with regard to minerals, and that is climate change. Climate change, as you know, is due to putting too much of the greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, dominated by carbon dioxide. And this simple graph really just illustrates that in the last few hundred years, since 1900, carbon dioxide contents in the atmosphere have been escalating from the 300 to we've over 400 ppm, and we're on the way to 500 ppm CO2. And so we're pumping too much carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and we've got to change that. And we know that our use of carbon is balanced, and the net increase at the moment is about 4 billion tons of carbon dioxide every year. And it's really because of our use, I'll show you in the middle here, it's our use of fossil fuels, cement, iron ore, and land use change, agriculture, that's creating this extra carbon dioxide, which adds 4 billion tons per year. So we've got to do something to change that. As geologists, I thought, well, let's put a geological timeline up to put it in perspective. As a geologist, we know that the carbon dioxide level of the planet has been much higher in the geological past. But if we go back to those times when there was very high carbon dioxide, we had big extinction events because the environment changed dramatically. At the end of the Cretaceous, when we had really high carbon dioxide recently, obviously the planet healed itself. We weathered rocks, and that will happen on our planet. There's no doubt that even if we increase carbon dioxide to a level that's even at these levels, the planet will heal itself by rock weathering that brings carbon dioxide into the rocks. The problem is it's not going to happen quickly enough for us to continue in the way that we work now. So we need to do something about our carbon dioxide release. And if we just look at what are the causes of the high CO2 emissions, so this is a graph showing the sources of carbon dioxide. It's generating power, it's our transportation, it's our industry. Actually, things like the other sectors, residential and so on, are much less. But these are the big ticket items, carbon dioxide, that we've got to change. So we've got to change the way we generate our power. We've got to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide that is caused by that. We've got to cut our transportation and industry carbon dioxide. Actually, industry is doing really well. So this is dropping quite well on an annual basis around the world. Most industries are reducing the amount of carbon, and that's largely because they're being taxed. So they're going to reduce their carbon outputs. Likewise, we're seeing a lot of countries tackling transportation and power generation. If we have a look at power generation, this graph is, this map shows the carbon intensity of energy consumption for 2022 for countries around the world. I don't have the data, sadly, for Argentina. I'm sure we could find it, but you can see the different colours here. The countries that are the most green actually have low carbon intensity for their energy production. And that means that they are generating their power in a way that is low carbon. So you can see quite lots of parts of Canada where they have nuclear power and hydro. Likewise, Norway, Sweden, Finland, where hydroelectric, they're very green. The sort of yellowy parts are parts of Europe. United Kingdom, we have a lot of wind power. France has nuclear power. Spain has increasing amounts of solar. But then we can see countries that are relying on burning fossil fuels, particularly coal. Poland's the worst in Europe. Germany's not very good, and USA isn't very good. So this is just, people can look at this afterwards. But some of the countries that are looking very green are places like Sweden, Iceland, Ontario, New Zealand, France. As I say, United Kingdom is in here. We're kind of going down towards that. As I say, I don't have the data for Argentina, but I'm sure you can actually look at how your country's doing with regard to that. And so we really need to cut that carbon intensity. And we know that governments are committed to this. So this has been COP26 last year and a year before, and then COP27 last year. We saw governments worldwide committing to reducing, securing a global net zero to make sure that the temperature change is going to only be within the 1.5 degrees Celsius rise. And that's mainly done by accelerating transition to clean energy ensuring sustainable land use, so we get natural carbon capture, and then looking at zero emission transport and innovative science. And that's all kind of relevant to minerals, as I'm about to show. So the rest of my talk will talk about how minerals are going to contribute to this decarbonising effort. So the first thing to talk about is transport. I'm going to talk about transport because it's something that we all do every day. We take a bus, we ride a bike, or we drive a car. And so lots of discussion out there. Should we be going towards electric vehicles? Is it really a saving in CO2 to have an electric car? And the answer is yes, if it's an electric car that is being recharged with green electricity. If you're having an electric car that is being recharged by electricity generated using coal, it's not. So if you put in that, we put the carbon back in. So if you have an electric vehicle, you can see here, it's going to use about half in its whole life, half the carbon dioxide that an internal combustion engine car will use. The problem is, if you have an electric car and then you recharge it with coal-fired electricity, it brings the CO2 up to there. So what we need are electric cars that are recharged with renewable energy. And then we can compare the two, and there's a 50% saving. So it is good if we have the right energy infrastructure. But then the first, when we look at it, we move towards renewables, all of a sudden we start to see that these renewable options are metal hungry. So this is the average wind turbine. We drove by a few yesterday on the way back to the city, and each wind turbine is using a lot of cement, a lot of steel, a lot of copper, a lot of rare earths, and a lot of aluminium. And the fact is, you've got to make lots of these to replace a power station. So all renewable technologies use significant sourced metals. So the bottom line is that going low carbon is a metal and mineral hungry business. So if we look at the metals involved in making a conventional car, and these are the metals in excess of the metals that are built, because each car is made of a chassis and wheels and structure. So they're shared between a battery electric or an internal combustion engine car. But if you compare the other extra materials, conventional car is using 40 kilograms of unusual metals, whereas the electric car is using 200. And it's using a lot in the batteries and in the cabling. And it's the same for power generation. If we compare coal, natural gas power station, and then we put in like offshore wind, and the amount of metal needed compared to how much is about 4 times that for a coal power station. And it's the same for all of these technologies, even nuclear, because nuclear uses a lot of materials for shielding and so on. So power generation, for more metals for each of those types of technology. And it's the same for, they were the sort of unusual metals that we used, but the conventional materials too. So these graphs show the amount of concrete, aluminium, steel, copper, and glass that's needed for different technologies. So if we look at conventional power down here in red, you can see the amount, because you build a single big unit in a coal power station, it actually is very efficient with regards to materials compared to building something like a hydroelectric dam where you have to build concrete dam, or photovoltaic where you're going to use a lot of steel, you're going to use a lot of copper for the wiring, you're going to use aluminium for the framework. So there's an increase in demand for the common materials as well for our new energy industry. And so actually the critical elements needed for the energy transition are not only things like the rare earths and the lithium and cobalt and so on, it's all these other important metals, particularly things like steel alloys, copper, zinc, and for particular technologies. For example, hydrogen's been talked about instead of batteries. We need platinum group metals for the fuel cells there. And so it's a big range of critical elements. The European Union has come up with 20, but it's actually for the transition we need a range of metals. So there's an increasing demand, and this has been quantified. This is from the IEA back in a World Bank study, sorry, back in 2018, and the sum there is that things like graphite, lithium, cobalt, indium are going to be increasing by up to 500% of what we're mining at the moment. And so this is in percentage terms, but in actual volumetric terms, it's very significant. Even though aluminium, we're only going to increase it by about 8%, in actual real terms, that's about that's 5,500 tons of extra, million tons, sorry, of extra aluminium. And the same for things like nickel and so on. So these are very significant increases. And as I talked about, can't we get those from recycling? Can't we turn our linear economy of taking things, making them, and then throwing them away into something that's circular when we reuse it? Well, even if we do that, for some of these metals, we've not used them before. So lithium, we've not used before. So actually, in order to get them recycled, we've got to be using them. So it's not until about 2040 will we get those metals available for us to recycle. So by 2040, we'll probably be able to, we'll have up to 35 or 40% of what we need from the old batteries from our cars and so on. But at the moment, we're still building those, and we still need to mine those. So the volumes of, by 2030, in the 10 years, from 2030 to 2040, we're going to see a big change in the amount of material available for recycling. So recycling is really important, but it's not going to happen today, and we need then to mine. And so this graph shows the orange is showing the amount of each of these commodities that we recycle at the end of their life, and the blue bar shows the amount of demand that is satisfied by recycling. So you can see we're pretty good at recycling cobalt, maybe 70%, but it's only providing 30% of what we need because the market's growing, so we need to fill the rest of that column with newly mined metal. And it's the same for practically everything. Lead might be the only exception where because we're very good at recycling lead, because it's poisonous, problematic, we're satisfying about 80% of what we need from recycled lead. So we're getting better. And some of these metals were pretty good, like titanium we're quite good as well. And so if we can increase those, it's going to help, but there's still a shortfall. And that's because the world is growing. Everyone talks about we need growth. I mean, Argentina, the prediction is for a 4% growth. Well, if things are growing, you're building new things. You're wanting to put infrastructure in, and for lots of Africa, and particularly in China and through Southeast Asia, the demand is for growth, and these mean that the demand for metals doesn't stand still. It's increasing because we've got more people wanting electricity in their homes, wanting a railway, wanting an electric car. And so when we calculate, we've done some calculations on the waste that's available in old mining tailings and these things. Even when we do that, we see that for quite a few metals, it's very small amounts of material in the landfill that's available to reuse. Fluorspar, there's probably more fluorspar that's in our waste that we could try to use, but for other metals, actually when you look at the total, they're not that, for cobalt, it's only 10,000 tons. There's 100,000 tons produced every year, probably going up to 200,000. So 10,000 tons is not, it's about, it's less than 5% of what we need for each year. So even if we took all the cobalt out of waste dumps, it would only be 5% of a year's production. So what we have is, hopefully we're developing a circular economy, but because we're still growing at the moment, we need to feed the circular economy. We need to cut out waste. We don't want a leaky circular economy like this diagram shows, but we constantly at the moment are needing to stock up the circular economy. Okay, for the next part of my talk, I'm going to talk about the fact that many of the minerals we need have supply risks. So I talked about it earlier, there is this worry that maybe we won't have enough copper to satisfy the demands. Well, it's the same for quite a few of the metals. This is a very complicated graph because it's a three-dimensional graph, but it's basically, for each of the elements, it's putting them in space that talks about their vulnerability to supply restriction. So that means, you might not be able to, the supply chain might get broken. Then there's the long-term supply risk, i.e. are we going to run out? And then on this graph, part of the graph, they put environmental implications. So for some elements, there are problems of where we're getting the materials from in an environmental sense. But each of these things makes, the more you go to the right or up, it's an increasing risk. So for some of these elements, there's quite a lot of supply risk. And particularly are these elements, which I talked about, the sort of critical minerals, because there are some geographic monopolies that I want to talk about. So if we look at monopolies, we have, in the past, I was a student during the 1970s when we had power cuts because of squeeze of supply of hydrocarbons at that time. And it was due to the fact that oil was controlled by a couple of countries who wanted to manipulate the market. But actually, if we look at metals, this graph shows the geographic supply for oil and gas. And what I've put on these bars here is the amount that each of these countries provides for the world market. So you can see oil and gas is dominated by the United States, oil by Saudi Arabia, gas by Russia. We're all very aware of that at the moment. And obviously Iran natural gas and increasingly Qatar and so on. But we can go down to look at the metals. Some of these metals are even more restricted in geographic supply. Copper, more than 30% of the world's copper comes from Chile, and then a big chunk from Peru. So really, if, God forbid, Chile and Peru had a war, let's just pretend it happened, copper could go crazy overnight. It's not going to happen, is it? But, there are places that you think it would not be good for two countries to provide all of that. One big one that people are very worried about is the fact that cobalt is coming from the Democratic Republic of Congo, where there have been issues with child labor and so on, so people are very worried about that. Graphite, which is used in batteries. China is the biggest supplier. Rare earths, we know about that from China. Lithium, Australia. Maybe we're happy with Australia being a big producer, but increasingly, and obviously Chile is a big producer, and Argentina could really be a big producer in here, could end up being potentially larger supplier than Chile. You go to a supermarket, you go to your shelves. If you've only got one product that you can choose from, i.e. no choice. So you can only see Democratic Republic of Congo cobalt. If you don't like that product, you're not going to buy it. And also, the price could be squeezed, couldn't it? So if you like to have a choice. If you've got 4 suppliers, you think the price actually would be more competitive. And I think that's really what this graph is showing, is that for some of these commodities, they're being controlled by one particular country, which is not great. And lots of people get a bit worried, platinum again in South Africa, because that is nearly 80% of the world's platinum coming from that one country. The other thing is that some of the metals that we look at, we're wanting to mine, we want for the new technologies, we don't actually mine them individually for that metal. So something like cobalt largely comes as a byproduct. This is a complicated graph to understand, but perhaps I can just spend a minute to explain that. Generally, the major mines of the world are based around these key commodities, and I showed you the pie chart at the beginning. So iron ore is obviously a major element that we mine only for iron. Aluminium, all of these metals in this blue circle here are metals where the principal component that a mine is working is that metal. And then what we've got outside it are the byproduct, that metal in the middle. So you can see for cobalt doesn't figure in the middle. So cobalt comes from copper, nickel, and a little bit from lead and zinc mines. So if you've got a mine that's suddenly stops production because the nickel price goes crazy, we might actually then stop producing lots of cobalt. So that becomes a supply issue. And this is particularly why cobalt is a worrisome metal, because not only is it geographically restricted, it's actually mineralogically it's restricted in the types of deposits that it can come from. Another issue is that, and this is where I go back to the copper graph. If you remember, I said it looks like after 2040 the copper production is going to drop off. And that's because the lead time between discovering a mine and putting it into production is quite long. And for copper, that can be up to 18 years. So even if you found a new copper deposit today, went out there outside the office here and you found a copper deposit here, you couldn't even dream of it becoming a mine for at least 18 years. And well, if it's in the city, would you get permitting for it? It may never gets permitted. But you can see for nickel, for copper, it's quite a long lead time. Other elements, for example, lithium mines in Australia, they can be discovered and put into production within 5 years. But for lots of these metals, it takes a long time. And that's why copper is such an issue, things like copper and nickel. You can't just turn on extra supply. It's not like oil and gas. You can't just turn the pipe and more supply. It takes a while to get them into production. Another issue is that we don't seem to be finding them at the right rate. Maybe as geologists, we're not as clever as we were before. Or maybe we are just running out. Well, I don't think we are running out. I think what we need to be is much cleverer. And that's, I think, because we're restricted in where we look, quite honestly. So if this is a graph that shows where do companies currently go to look for new ore deposits? Well, quite honestly, they go to countries where it's easy to work, where you can get permits, where people are amenable to allow mining. So Canada still gets like the biggest chunk of the world's exploration money because it's a country that welcomes mines. Other places that welcome mining would be like Australia. But other places in the world, I mean, Chile, there's a lot of money goes into Chile, West Africa, Peru, Brazil, the US. Russia, not so much, only 5%, and that's probably gone down to quite a bit. Only about 4% in Europe, and still China quite small. And in this part of the world, there's only about 1% of exploration budget goes into here. And I haven't got the figures for Argentina, but I imagine that's quite small too. So really, we've got very distorted distribution of where we're looking for deposits. And I would argue we need to expand that look into more places. We know that, I think as geologists, we can find new deposits. This has been a big eye-opener for me. In 2004, Rio Tinto were exploring in Serbia, which is in the Balkan region of Europe, and they were drilling for borates. They were looking for borates, and they drilled into this deposit that had boron in there, but it was a white mineral they'd never seen before, and they brought it to the Natural History Museum, and we were able to identify that it was a completely new mineral. And not only that, there was 110 million tons of mineral. Now, I don't know, any of you are kind of normally a new mineral now is found on a thin section, maybe by the microprobe, because we've had a lot of looking around the planet. Hopefully we found most of the minerals that are out there. But this demonstrates that we can still find new minerals, and we can find new mineral deposits. So if you think I was a bit gloomy with all of the previous slides, there's an optimism in me that we can still, if we are ambitious and we explore, we can find new deposits, and we can find them in new places that we haven't looked before. And this is a graph that a chap, Richard Shoddy in Australia, put together, and it illustrates the depth below the surface of where the mineral deposit was found. And this is time on the top here. So, you know, in 1900, practically everything that we found was at the surface. And we might have gone down, this is 500 meters here. So really, until 1960, we never looked below 500 meters. Then in 1960, technology allowed us to go deeper. And what you can see here is, increasingly, we're finding deeper deposits, but we're still mostly finding things at the surface. Now, as geologists, you can't believe that everything's going to be on the surface, you know. So there's a lot of stuff in here that we could find. And this is where we need the clever generations of new scientists that can help discover those deposits. Also, because they're deep down, they could be the ones that are easier to get mining permission for, because they don't cause the surface disruption that other mines might do. And we know that can happen. This is a mine in Ireland. It's Europe's largest zinc mine. So what happened was this is a cross section. There was a large zinc sulfide ore body that had been mined for many, many years, and using sort of old technologies and drilling down to about 500 meters. But then someone decided, well, let's try oil field hydrocarbon exploration technology for this basin. So we could use, in this case, they use seismic investigation. And by bringing that new technology, they were then able to discover this buried resource, which is going to give them another 20 years of mine life, which was found using new oil field technologies. And it's just showing you that bringing new skills can help us to find deeper deposits. There's a lot of people saying we should go to the deep ocean floor. It's very controversial. You probably see there's a lot of news. A lot of people want us to forget about the minerals on the deep ocean floor. But when you look at the amount of metals down there, 10 years of global copper production could come from these nodules, 300 years of manganese, and more than 450 years of cobalt production could come from mining these nodules on the ocean floor. This is the final one, probably not for your generation, maybe your children will have a chance to go and mine asteroids. Enormous amounts of metals on those, but I put that really more as a kind of a joke because it's not going to happen in our time. But the thing is, I think there is a debate here. Where do we go for those new metals and minerals? Should we go on the ocean floor? Should we mine on the Earth's surface? And of course, the debate about where those come from is very complex. And this is just a few papers that are sometimes in the press. This is the UK press, where people are saying we should not go to the ocean floor because it's pristine. And then there are other people saying, well, compared to mining on land, it's a lot less impactful if we go onto the ocean floor. So there's a big debate out there, and it's part of society to kind of decide that. But I think when we start to consider that, we are thinking of things like biodiversity now. We hear about that. It's very important that we protect the ecosystem. We don't want to do new mining and cause a huge problem around the planet. So this is a diagram one of my colleagues put together, and it looks at the biodiversity intactness of the planet. So anything in blue is where things are pretty pristine, and it basically reflects where modern humans have not been. Industrialized humans have not been. So areas are, if you like, the far north, the Arctic, places in sort of Saharan Africa, the Amazon basin. You can see there are sort of yellow and green lines coming in. These are where humans have come in and developed, and this line is changing. But all the areas in red are where humans have really disturbed the ecosystems. So look at the United Kingdom. We're completely red because we're just farmland. You know, Britain hasn't really. North of Scotland, we've got a little bit of. But one of the things that's quite interesting for me is how disturbed Argentina is. That the evidence of humans in southern parts of Brazil and down through Argentina is quite dramatic. It's quite changed. Now, okay, that sounds bad, but it could be good from a mining point of view, because actually, if you go and mine in those areas, they're already degraded. So putting mining into places that have already been disturbed is not a bad thing. Actually, we should be protecting those green areas maybe, and thinking about, and this is controversial, I wrote a paper to suggest we should mine in Britain because we are so disturbed. Do it close to home, we can look after it. Actually, we could maybe even make things better because we could create wetlands at the end of it and make something that was better. You know, you might suggest Argentina is a great country for mining because it's so it's so disrupted your ecosystem here because of people farming and all of these that mining is not going to degrade it anymore, and it could actually be good. And then, of course, lots of things like water are problematic. And, you know, the whole of the Western South America is problematic. You know, again, just using Argentina, water's less of a problem in Argentina. And there are lots of countries where water is not such a problem. But unfortunately, a lot of copper mines seem to be in areas where there's water problems. So I can see pressure, well, we see it in Chile, don't we? Pressure on water and mining. And I think that's increasingly going to be, people aren't going to want mines where there's conflicts with water. So I've suggested, sorry, it's not come out very well, we can really look again at Europe, and actually some of the old European mining districts have a lot of value. So the Lubin deposit system in Poland, over here, is huge value of metal there. And so economically makes sense, and also it's in disturbed areas and actually would not contribute to biodiversity issues. And this is actually happening in Cornwall. So there's an old mining district of southwest England where they used to mine kaolin. Now people are going back and finding lithium. And so actually that's where an old mining district might get revitalized. And I'd suggest, if I put up just my one slide about Argentina, this is the United States Geological Survey estimate of potential for copper deposits worldwide. Argentina's got really quite big untested potential for copper, both porphyry copper and sediment-hosted copper. And I have had a week looking at the Neuquén Basin that is potentially somewhere where copper could be produced in Argentina. And so I think these are the kind of places we perhaps should be looking for these new metals. And mining could be looked on positively in some areas. So at Kiruna up in northern Sweden, the local people voted to move the town because the mine wanted to go under the town. So many people were employed at the mine. They all voted to move the town, including the church, the cemetery, and they moved it all so that the mine could continue. It was that important for people. And people have done the same in the United Kingdom, and tungsten mine is opened near the town of Plymouth. And when Cornish Lithium wanted to raise some money from, they decided to do crowdsourcing. They raised £6 million in 15 minutes from local people wanting to buy shares, because local people wanted mining back in Cornwall. But in other places, it's less welcome. So I told you about that big lithium deposit in Serbia. Local people don't want the mine. It's interesting that this is going to be a mine to produce lithium for battery electric vehicles that will improve the environment, and people don't want the mine on environmental grounds. Likewise, it's difficult in Portugal and France as well. And partly that is because we haven't got our relationship with stakeholders and so on right. We've neglected a lot the social areas, the bottom triangle here. So you might have heard of ESG, environmental, social and governance issues. So these are the other things other than economics and geology that control mining. So the environmental impact, well, we can address that by making sure the mining's done properly. The governance, we can make sure there's no corruption. We can make sure that the money comes back to the people who deserve it. But the social bit in the past has been done very badly by the mining industry. Largely, local people have been ignored. A big company comes in, starts a mine, and local people have to accommodate it, and they were never part of the planning stage. So what I'm kind of arguing, and I wrote a paper last year with a colleague about it, that we need to have better types of mining that is less impactful, can be net positive for the planet and people. So mining that protects and reconstructs the ecosystem. This is a mine, the Flambeau mine in Wisconsin. It was a Rio Tinto mine, and they mined a lot of copper. Over $1 worth of revenue came out of this mine. They mined it close to a salmon river. They restored the site. It's now a bit of a wetland. It's parkland. They continue to be able to fish salmon on the river, and there's a little local industrial estate. So the miners have got new work to do. There's something for the local people to use, and the people who were the fishermen there were not impacted. And so this is a case of where, because there was a really good social, environmental and governance program, it's ended up being a success for everybody. It's made a lot of money. And what it's embracing is this concept, and we see it, Michael Braungart and William McDonough come up with this concept of a cradle to cradle. So for manufacturing, cradle to cradle is easy. You make a product, you use it, but then you break the product down and then you reuse all of those components again. This is this kind of cradle to cradle concept. We see that in biology because there's no such thing as waste out in the natural world. There's an ecosystem that uses everything that's a waste product from one animal, it's used by others. And so we should be thinking of this for our mine, that we have it, think of it as an ecosystem. It's going to produce wealth, but it's got to be good for the environment, and it's got to be good for the people that work there. And actually, when the mining's finished, you need to end up with something that somebody else can use, be it animals, plants, could be a factory. But nevertheless, what you shouldn't leave is just a horrible hole in the ground as a legacy, a graveyard. So we should be going from cradle to grave towards cradle to cradle. And some of the other things we've got to do in mining is cut the amount of energy that mining uses. Again, we need to have some clever metallurgists who will come in and make mining more energy efficient. Currently, 6% of the world's energy is used just for breaking rocks. We need to cut that down. So if we can find better ways of cutting energy, of getting those metals, because again, there's no point producing all the copper for a green economy if you're having to use all of this energy to break that rock to get the metals out. And so there's a whole range of things that could be brought in using hydrometallurgy. Instead of breaking rocks with energy, we can break rocks using acid, in this case, acid consumption. But there's increasing research work on things like deep eutectic solvents. So these are all clever new sort of chemical ways of doing mining that hopefully will come into these new deposits. And something that my own research group have been working on is using microbes, using natural bacteria that can break rocks down. And we can also use these for cleaning up old mine waste areas. We can reduce the amount of acid problems. So this is something that my group has been doing. But all of this new type of mining demands better geoscience. So it's why all of you are really needed, because we need to better characterize the rocks that we are going to be using. So all those things we take out of the ground, we should be thinking of it all as a resource. We shouldn't be thinking that any of it's a waste. So this is why we need detailed information about the mineralogy, the composition, where the elements are deported. In the past, we've gone into an area and we've said we want to find copper. We found a copper mine, and we've not thought about all those other things that were with the copper. And a lot of those have gone on the waste dumps. And if we thought better about it, we could have a plan that some of those things might be available for future resource. So copper, for example, rhenium is an associated metal with copper deposits. If you restore that ecosystem so it comes back, it won't be exactly what it was before, but it will be something that is sustainable. And if you've characterized all the materials that you're digging out and all those waste materials you've got, you can then design the authentic post-mining topography from the beginning and during the mining. And you need to engage the people, the local people in this, so because they're the ones that are going to have to take this back at the end of the mining cycle. And you're not going to be able to walk away from a horrible hole in the ground. And so what we've been arguing for is this cradle to cradle approach to mining, where we, at the start of a mining project, you have the local, all the stakeholders involved in looking at assessing the natural habitats and its potential resource. And all the way through the mining cycle, we are aware of the products we're taking out, the products we're leaving behind. And what we design is a way of getting us back to the starting point, so it becomes a natural habitat and a potential resource moving forward. It might not be the same potential that it had before, because it could be used for something else. But if you've actually designed that, you've got a chance of people accepting that mining is part of human life, because it should be. Because I go back to that original statement: if you don't grow it, you've got to mine it. And we all use products that are grown, we eat them generally, and we perhaps have wood on our seats and things. But all the other stuff, the tiles on the floor and the metal chairs, we're mining it. So we all need to be part of this. We're part of the problem, but we're also part of the solution. And so I'm just going to end on the final slide here as a takeaway messages. There's a few papers here that I've written on this subject that you can sort of go away and read. But there's a clear need to mine these metals. That's obvious. We really do need to deliver that net zero challenge by 2050. I mean, we're on a transition here. It was interesting to come and go around the Neocomic Basin and see, the hydrocarbon exploitation. But we have to be realistic. We need those. We need that gas at the moment. We're on a transition here. We don't close those things down before we build the next generation. But let's make sure this is the here and now. We build all of that so the transition's available while we've got the resources to fund that. So this new securing of metals has to have a net positive impact for people and planet. As I've said, we should optimize our recycling. Everybody go and recycle all your stuff, but we still need mining. So recycling is not going to stop mining. But I think it should be following this cradle to cradle principle where actually regenerating old mining districts in already impacted areas could be really good. And there's some good examples down in Cornwall where there's an old China clay mine that has now become an eco centre. It's the largest visitor attraction in Cornwall now. So that when the mine has closed, it's brought in more jobs than by building this new eco centre than ever the mine produced. So you can start to think of post-mining activities for sites that are really, really positive. And then, mining could drive other social and economic benefits. Localizing industry, clean up of environmental legacy. So particularly in Europe, there's some horrible wastes that have been left. We could go in there and actually clean those up as part of that. And strengthen our supply chains. We heard a lot about supply chain issues, and the recent war that's happening in Europe has shown how fragile they are. But just imagine if the supply chain was short and you were able to, in Argentina, get most of what you need from locally, you don't have to worry about that because it's under your control. So that's another important aspect. But I think that is all I have to say. So thank you very much for your attention. We're a little over the hour, but I hope it was interesting, and I'm really happy to entertain any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard.
I have one question.
Yeah.
The map you show about the disturbed areas, how are the parameters you use or the people use to construct that? Because Patagonia is not so much impact, right?
No, it is interesting. So in each of those areas, it's establishing the ecosystem based around the published work that was done pre-human disturbance. So it's not any particular species. It's looking at the integrity of particular ecosystem. So in the case of Patagonia, I don't know what it is exactly. Well, I can find that publication for you.
No, but it's true because the trees, for example, and the fishes that enter in the system, they are quite highly divided. ¿No?
Hay muchas especies introducidas.
Claro.
El ciervo, el liebre, los conejos, todas esas cosas.
Los pinos, todo eso. Lo miro a Silvio porque es el defensor número 1 de los pinos de la Patagonia.
Sí. I don't know, because I was surprised when I saw the picture. It's very strange because yes, in the mountains there are many pine trees and many exotic species there, but not in the middle. in the middle.
For me, this map is
Maybe
not-
the ships, but the ships are drawn. Depende de los ríos, los rivers, la porquería, no todo la animó. Sí.
Well, we have to check that.
Yeah,
It's too red for my
Yes.
opinion.
well, you know, that's in a way that's why I put
I
it
was
down.
thinking maybe it's something political.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah,
Behind this.
yeah.
Those
Well-
Argentina is still mining, so
Yeah.
continue there, continue there.
Right.
Well, this was by IPBES, so it's it's a bunch of what should I say, research scientists who did this. It wasn't funded by any scheme. But look, I'll definitely find the basis for that for you, because I think it was a surprise to me to see, why is Patagonia so red? It looks like England, but I've driven across just at least a part of it. It does seem undisturbed, but yeah.
Yeah, I suppose there are no place in the world without this true.
It is true, and I suppose it's whether the farming practices have in some way damaged invertebrates, or it might not be, because this study is not based on looking at what we might call iconic species, so pandas or puma, or it would be the invertebrates and the small mammals and so on. So, and there may be different reasons for that change. And it's not, it could be human, it could just be environmental caused by humans. So maybe there's been a change, a massive change in rainfall or something. I don't know. But I'm not the biologist, I'm presenting a slide from a colleague, but I'll certainly get that. Because it's good to discuss, because is it really the case? Absolutely it is for Europe. In England, we have no real nature. It's farmland. We've had people there farming for 1,000 years, so we've changed our landscape completely.
The thing is that in the Cordillera, it's green, so it would be the idea of saying, well, we have to go to mining. That's not the map, because the Cordillera area is put in green. I don't know.
It is, because there are few species there. And actually, that's in those areas where we think, oh, this is like desert. These are the most fragile, because the ecosystem that is there is really quite fragile. But it's good to have that discussion, because if we're going to present these things, we need to make sure everybody's happy about it. And I was assuming that the biologists in Argentina would have contributed to this. So they must have.
Yes. About the ocean's bottoms, is just an idea, or is some project going on?
For mining,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, there are companies now who, at the moment, they're allowed to do exploration, so they can take limited samples. There are biologists assessing the impacts of those small pieces of work. So what's happened is, the deep ocean is regulated by the International Seabed Authority. So it's a UN body who they look after the sea floor for the whole planet. And they set up this body, International Seabed Authority, who have permitted licenses for investigation. At the moment, no mining licenses, but so what's happening is that there are companies looking who have ambition to mine there. So this is why we need to have this debate now, because we need to decide, do we allow this, or do we say no, we can allow mining in terrestrial environments, but not the deep ocean.
There is no mining in ocean's waters in Alaska, for example. People who drag the ocean's bottom and looking for the funds, go into the platform, and they collect coal mostly,
Yeah.
but affecting for example, the fishing, which is also a disturbing activity of the environment.
Yeah. I mean, this mining is going to be done 3 kilometers down. So the idea is, well, the impact for fishing would be when they bring the material up, they create dust, particles in the water. Because actually at 3 kilometers down, it won't affect the fishing, but what it will affect is, well, again, these are very fragile ecosystems because.
But they're going to remove the bottom of the ocean that contains a lot of materials and elements that could affect the life.
Exactly. So that work is being done now. But you're right. We need to kind of, and actually we've got biologists who are working with the mine. Well, they've been allowed to go on the boat with the mining company to look at this environmental impact because nobody knows what it is going to be. So hopefully now there'll be some independent scientific data which can be used to assess this debate. I mean, I don't personally support the mining on the seafloor, or I'm not against it. I'm a scientist. I want to see the evidence before I make my opinion. Because if someone said to you, we'll have the nickel, we need this rainforest from this rainforest or from this ocean floor, what would you decide? It's difficult. Or do you say we don't want any metal? Then we have to say, well, we don't want to solve the energy crisis. So,
The first question always going to be why we need the metal.
Yes.
Because
yes,
when you have a problem with the recycling, because I think the recycling remove the consumption. We need to get new phones, to get new things, and then recycle. So why we don't? I think we have to improve the reliability of the devices. That they have to endure more, to make more efficient. But we use that. We make more efficient devices, and every year we have more efficient devices to buy. So it's a cycle,
I agree, but you tell that to a village in India, they have no electricity. They need to have electricity. They want to have these technologies. If it's from recycling, they're going to ask you, can I have your copper for the wire? Sometimes it's this decision. This becomes a political decision. I agree. I think I'm completely with you. In the developed economies, we need to cut our consumption. It's ridiculous. I did the estimate on if we change 31.5 million cars, and we have 31.5 million cars in the United Kingdom. So we have 70 million people. So that's one car for every 2 people, including children. And I've calculated replacing all of those with electric cars, but that's crazy because 90% of the time the car is on the street, parked. Why do you want the car? If you want transportation, let's think of a different way. Bring people in. Having transportation is one thing, but owning a car, is that necessary? We should be having pool cars where you use a car when you want it, and then someone else uses it. So, like the low-cost airline, their planes are always flying because a plane is designed to fly. A car is designed to drive. They should always be driving, not sitting on a street. So straight away, I'm saying to you guys, why are all these cars here? This is all that's metal. If you could all come to work in a bus, we could get rid of that. So it's a big society discussion.
Yeah, we need to change how we consume and
Absolutely.
how much we consume.
Absolutely.
That is the point.
Well, hopefully, everyone, you know, I showed this work, and it's quite clear we've got problems. Everyone's saying there's a shortfall, but you know, we're human beings, we will adapt. My feeling is we will cut consumption because we will have to, because there won't be, we can't have all of these material things. So, you know, who has an old one of these at home in the drawer, or in a computer? How many old computers do we have? You know, it's like we should just be either not replacing, like you were suggesting, or we find a way of these becoming reused in another way. I mean, our old phone could go to, I don't know, someone in Africa or whatever. We do that, but actually, the museum, we do our computers. We don't buy a new computer. We always send our computer back, and we get a computer, and it might have components from old computers put into it. So as an organisation, we don't just, we've done a deal with the manufacturer that they provide us with a modern computer, but it might have old components in it. So I think we can do more of that kind of thing.
Richard, do gold and silver follow the same trends as the metals you have presented, for example, like nickel or cobalt?
But it's interesting, you know, because gold really, 65% of gold is used for jewellery. Do we need it?
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
Yes, we do.
Diamonds. 80% of diamonds are to go on a ring or an earring. Do we need them?
No, I don't think I Yeah.
So gold. We do use gold in technology. I mean, the phone has, as you know, has gold and so on, but that's only like 25% of what we need. So no, it doesn't really. Gold is looked upon as a kind of a currency. It's obviously like another. For so many cultures, people store their value in gold. Even, you know, places like India and so on, particularly for women, it's important that they have that as their money, and so it behaves differently.
As Marilyn said, ladies like diamonds.
Yes, again, I mean, everyone argues, well, we need diamonds for industry, but you know, they're the cheap diamonds. They're not the beautiful ones that we. And some of the Zhuaneng diamond mine, they found I think it was a 1,000-carat stone. It paid for the mining for 20 years, one stone. So, and it's just useless, really. Beautiful, but useless.
Well, no, there are some comments thanking in YouTube. They are saying thank you.
Okay, thank you.
For the talk, and that I agree with the map that we commented very early.
Yeah.
That are the two comments on YouTube.
Yeah, we need to set chat map, don't we? Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.